We made it, ladies and gentlemen. The final division preview of the 2025 offseason. And it's only fitting that we get to talk about the NFC East because it features the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. Welcome to OC and TJ, a.k.a. the Collin O'Callahan Show, a.k.a. the kid that is trying to falsely delude everybody that I can grow a beard. So thank you for tuning in. Thanks for watching. So I think it's only fitting that we just let us just get it. Let us get it going. Let us just get it. Let me share the screen. Bop, bop, to the top. Okay, here we go. We're going to begin with the defending champs, the Philadelphia Eagles, coming off, an outstanding season, 14-3 record, number 2 seed in the NFC, beat Green Bay, Los Angeles, Washington, and the Kansas City Chiefs to get their second Super Bowl title in franchise history. And the biggest reason why the Eagles were able to, dismantle them, obviously it was their defense, but we'll get into that in just a second. On offense, the main guy in charge was Jalen Hurts because, yes, while they had the best player on the field at Saquon Barkley, it was the numbers that Jalen Hurts put up that allowed him to win that Super Bowl MVP, how he was able to take charge of the offense, and more importantly, how he was able to redeem himself after getting his heart broken just a couple years ago. So Jalen Hurts is not coming off the strongest regular season, only 18 touchdowns and 5 picks, but I'm going to use the same logic that I used with Justin Herbert just yesterday, is that they didn't have to carry the load and they didn't have too much weight on their shoulders the way that they were forced to in the past based on the teams and the supporting cast that they had around them. Jalen Hurts still ran for 14 touchdowns. A lot of it was off the tush push, which didn't get banned. But you know that without Jalen Hurts, the Eagles are nowhere near the Super Bowl contender that, they've been over the last few seasons. And that is saying a lot considering that they got Saquon Barkley in their backfield. Coming off a 2,000-yard season, making the Giants eat so much crow and drink so much, sodium chloride that, it's overflowing MetLife Stadium's very, very terrible turf. I'm trying not to curse, so that's why I'm slowing down my thought process. But the point is, Saquon Barkley was just the dynamic playmaker and the missing piece that Philadelphia really needed, at least offensively, to make sure that they, exceeded the expectations and to make sure that they reached the ceiling that they had entering the 2024 season. But that's not to dismiss the passing attack because it's still got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. They just made the trade for John Mechie. So him and Jahan Dotson, along with Johnny Wilson, Aeneas Smith, and Terrace Marshall Jr., they're going to fight out in the final week of the preseason to see who's going to be that third option, or at least the third wide receiver option. But we all know that the security blanket on this team is going to be Dallas Goedert, who is still one of the best tight ends in all of football. Only played 10 games last year due to a lingering, I think it was an ankle injury or a knee injury, whatever the case was. It kept him sidelined. Fortunately, he was able to return in time for the playoffs. So when these three are at full strength, you know that it's going to be a fluid passing attack. New offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, obviously is staying in the Bayou to be the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. So Kevin Patullo is going to be the new offensive coordinator. He's going to be the one with the headset. And as you can clearly see, he's got a fully loaded, offense to work with, especially on the O-line. Able to bring back Lane Johnson, Landon Dickerson. He's, going to miss some time with the meniscus injury, but it's fortunately not season-ending, not the one that J.J. McCarthy had last year. Still got Jordan Mailata as the blindside blocker. Cam Jurgens, did an absolutely outstanding job taking over in his first full year as the starting center. And even though you did lose Mekhi Becton, Tyler Steen is definitely one of their, developmental pieces that they're hoping could, transform into a legitimate starting right guard. And as long as Jeff Southlin is still the offensive line coach, you know that it's going to be one of the more surefire offensive lines in football. So I'm going to get into what, my best case and worst case scenario for this offense is. But first, I want to talk about the defense because it was single-handedly the biggest reason why the Philadelphia Eagles were as elite as they were last year. Second in points allowed, fewest yards allowed, third on third down, tied for fifth in the red zone, third in passer rating, fewest yards per attempt, sixth in completion percentage, fewest passing yards per game, 41 sacks, which is tied for 13th, 27th in pressure percentage, which is actually ironic, and they were also 28th in blitz percentage. But at the same time, let me look at their rush defense numbers here. They were, if I can pull it up, 9th in yards per carry and 10th in yards per game, which is absolutely remarkable considering how much of a dumpster fire they were the year before when Sean Desai and Matt Patricia were in charge of running that group. They obviously relied on their front four to bring them home, especially in the postseason, but the secondary was incredibly lethal, and they had one of the most stacked linebacking cores of the league. They did lose a lot of veteran pieces. They lost Darius Slay, James Bradbury, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Josh Sweat, Milton Williams. So it's going to be an incredibly different defense, but knowing Howie Roseman, he's not going to have more misses than hits. You look at the pass rush, it's still fundamentally sound with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. Obviously, like I said, you lost a lot of your veteran girth, so you're going to rely on a lot of younger pieces to really step up. They signed Byron Young. You got Moro Ajomo, Nolan Smith, still an outstanding quality edge rusher that really got a lot more reps last season. 6.5 sacks with 11 quarterback hits. The linebacking core has, one of the best renaissance players in Zach Bond, coming off a first-team All-Pro caliber season with 151 tackles, 3.5 sacks, 5 forced fumbles, and 11 tackles for loss. And even though you did lose, like I said, you did lose a lot of veterans, it's going to give guys like Jalix Hunt, an opportunity to, really thrive into a bigger role. And there's a reason why they drafted Jahad Campbell in the first round, which, by the way, the fact that they let, a top 10, top 15 caliber player fall all the way to the Philadelphia Eagles to boost an already an elite defense led by Vic Fangio, that just seems wrong if you're an outside fan. And as for the secondary, that it's, going to feature 2 of your first round corners, or your top 2 corners from last year's draft, in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, coming off strong seasons, coming off outstanding rookie years. You got Reed Blankenship and Sidney Brown in your safety position. So like I said, you don't have Gardner Johnson, you don't have Slay, you don't have Bradbury, you don't even have Avonte Maddox. But this is the year for your younger guys to really show that, we're going to pick up right where we left off, and we're not going to experience any, diminished progress whatsoever. So, and you also have Adoree Jackson as an additional depth piece, along with Jacorian Bennett, who was I actually mentioned yesterday. I was like, what happened to Jacorian Bennett? And I realized, oh, that's right. They traded him to the Raiders. Or they traded him to the Eagles from the Raiders, along with Kelly Rango, who's, a promising piece out of Georgia. So I'm going to put the Philadelphia Eagles in the legit contenders category. And I do this pretty much every year when it comes to the Super Bowl teams, because unless you finally knock down the giant of the conference, then if you're like one of these teams like Detroit or Tampa or the Los Angeles Rams, the minute you could beat them, then you could really elevate yourselves into the higher tier. So my best case scenario for the Philadelphia Eagles is that they win the division once again. They break that streak of no repeat winners in the NFC East, and they're the ones representing the NFC. But my worst case scenario is a repeat of what happened in the 2023 season. Where they get out to an outstanding start, they're 10-1. There are some flaws that, give you some room for pause or some room for concern, but you don't really think about it too much, only for them to just implode down the stretch and get massacred in the playoffs. And, pretty much have to start from scratch again, because your new coordinators that took over for the 2 guys that took head coaching positions could not, live up to the mantle, that cannot, bring these groups, back to or keep them at the respectable levels that they once were, or the year before. So that's, I'm hoping that's not the case, but I'm expecting, the Eagles to once again be the ones, representing the NFC at the number 1 seed. But the Washington Commanders might have something to say about that. And the biggest reason why is because of this guy right here, Jaden Daniels. I know people don't really take too much stock when it comes to the preseason, but if you watched his touchdown run against the Cincinnati Bengals in week 2, then that's just a sign that, oh yeah, no, Washington's going to prove that last year was not just an accident, whatsoever. 12-5 season, beat Tampa Bay and Detroit, who was the number 1 seed in the NFC last year, to get to the conference championship. And even though they didn't have enough to beat the Philadelphia Eagles, it was the best season they had in over 3 decades. And now they're trying to show that they can surge even higher. But I'm also hoping that this isn't this isn't the same situation that the Houston Texans were in, that the Green Bay Packers were in last year. Teams that were hoping to have outstanding seasons, but don't look as fun or as exciting as we all hoped it would be. And I think one warning sign or one red flag that might hint at a scenario like this is Terry McLaurin holding out. Obviously, I don't think the contract length is what the issue is. It's how much he's going to get paid. He wants to get paid $30 million a year, or at least $30 million, but for whatever reason, Washington is not budging. And I get it. There's a salary cap that has to be taken into consideration. Obviously, there are guys that are in line to get paid that you need to figure out, how much can we pay them and what can we do to make sure that they're not on another team in the near future. But at the same time, Terry McLaurin last year showed to you that all he needed was a good quarterback throwing him the football, and the rest of the offense would, be able to take off. Terry McLaurin has been the most consistent piece of the offense since he had arrived as a draft pick in 2019 out of Ohio State. He had to play with Case Keenum, Dwayne Haskins, Alex Smith, Kyle Allen, Taylor Heineke, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Carson Wentz, Sam Howell, and Jacoby Brissett before Jaden Daniels was drafted number 2 overall. And he finally showed you that he is definitely the most important piece to the Washington Commanders offense. And that, year in and year out, week in and week out, he is going to be the best player on that football field. And that is not taking anything away from Jaden Daniels because he had an outstanding rookie season. But Terry McLaurin, if there is any player on this offense that deserves to get paid at the earliest convenience, it is number 17 right there. So I'm hoping that holdout ends pretty soon. Obviously, he returned to practice. They activated him off the PUP list, or they're working to activate him off the PUP list. But when you see that he didn't even show up to the preseason game against the Cincinnati Bengals, then it's a reminder that, things are still in an impasse. And we're just waiting to see when it is finally going to break and you got to figure out which side is going to finally cave in, or which side is, going to say, you know what, let's meet down the middle and let's just work our way on getting back onto the football field. Because we all know how critical of a piece Terry McLaurin is. Because even though the rest of the offense looks pretty solid, without Terry, it's not going to be the same. The running back room, I have a feeling that it's going to look different in the next week or so because Brian Robinson Jr. has been in a lot of trade talks. He didn't show up to the preseason game as well. And the reports are saying that, they're trying to, find a trade partner for him. So that way it gives rise to the likes of Ja'Cory Krosky-Meret, one of their mid-round draft picks. It also gives Austin Eckler, the position to thrive in his role as the starting lead back. Or actually, you know what? We're gonna see what it comes down to between these two guys and how they're going to be utilized into this Cliff Kingsbury style offense. They made the trade for Deebo Samuel, so he's obviously coming off a couple seasons where he's been banged up and where he's been injured, but he's trying to return to the form that he once had at San Francisco and show that he really just needed a change of scenery to really thrive into his role. Luke McCaffrey, hoping for a bigger role this season after somewhat of a lackluster rookie year. Noah Brown stays as, the third option most likely, or the fourth, depending on how you really look at it. They got Michael Gallup out of retirement, so who knows if he's going to be a focal point of this offense, especially when you have an outstanding security blanket at Zach Ertz at tight end. But my biggest concern is the offensive line and, being able to figure out how, it's going to work, how they're going to play this season. Let me pull up my notes here real quick. I actually have it. Hold on. Here we go. They allowed 50 sacks last season, which was tied for 25th in the National Football League. And they were 9th in quarterback percentage. They added Laramie Tunsil. Obviously, that's, a bigger upgrade over the blindside blocker that they had last year. But he's also coming off a year where, he committed a lot of penalties. And we really didn't see the elite blindside protector that we're used to seeing from him. So just like Deebo, hopefully we're, getting a new change of pace here. They drafted Josh Connerly with their first-round pick, so that's going to be a new big addition to their O-line, especially, gives Andrew Wiley some competition. Tyler Biadasz coming off a pretty strong year at center, but Brandon Coleman and Sam Cosmi are definitely not the strongest interior pieces that you can really count upon. But when you have Jaden Daniels, but he's still one of the more athletic quarterbacks in the league. So I think, if he continues to excel his play and enters himself into the MVP conversations, then this is still going to be one of the hottest offenses in football. As for the defense, it was kind of what I was expecting last year. It wasn't elite. It wasn't horrible. It was opportunistic, but it showed a lot of rough patches. They were 18th in points allowed, 13th in yards per game, 15th on third down, and 22nd in the red zone. And I think one of the biggest reasons why is because they had a pretty starless pass rush. It had 43 sacks, which was tied for 11th. They were 7th in blitz percentage, but they were also 17th in pressure percentage as well. They released Jonathan Allen, who was one of their, best defensive linemen since he's been drafted. You still have Deron Payne, along with Dorrance Armstrong, who are quality pass rushers. They signed Javon Kinlaw. They added Dietrich Wise. You got Jaxson Dart coming off a pretty promising rookie year. You got Cleveland Farrell as an additional depth piece. But you got to really see, who's going to be the key standout pass rusher that you got to shut down. Obviously, they're going to try to work it by committee. But I think, if you could get outstanding Pro Bowl caliber seasons from one of these two guys, or if you get, a surprising breakout year from the rest of the guys that I mentioned, then I think you'll be in a promising position. Against the run, they were not so great if you ask me. They were 28th in yards per carry, and they gave up the third most rushing yards in the league, which is absolutely stunning considering that you've got an outstanding linebacking duo of Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louisville. Oh, and not to mention, they also signed Von Miller, who's, still can play, but he's not an elite pass rusher. So, or not the elite pass rusher that he was in Denver, or even when he won the Super Bowl with the Los Angeles Rams. So I think maybe adding him can not only improve the run defense, but could also improve the pass rush as well. But that's got to be something that needs to get taken care of immediately. Because Bobby Wagner had 132 tackles. Frankie Louisville had 99 with 8 sacks and 14 quarterback hits, yet they still allowed the third most rush yards in the league. That's really concerning. And the secondary, I think, is going to be, their most improved piece, because not only did they have a few key additions, but they're going to be fully healthy, and they're going to finally have a chance to show that, when they're on the field, they can be incredibly impactful players. Didn't post the godliest numbers, 19th in passer rating, 11th in yards per attempt, but at the same time, they allowed the third fewest yards per game and the 5th lowest completion percentage. So when you have Marshawn Lattimore and Mike Sainristil, as your top two corners, then I think, when they're fully healthy and when they're 100%, this is definitely a secondary that you don't want to underestimate too much. They still have Quan Martin. You added Will Harris in free agency, along with Jonathan Jones, Noah Igbenogany, and Trey Amos. They're going to be quality depth pieces. I mean, in this depth chart, you got Trey Amos as the starting left guard. So I'm actually kind of curious as to see, and as to whether or not he's going to be the number 2 corner that Dan Quinn is going to count upon anytime Marshawn Lattimore is in a little bit of a bind. But I would say this when it comes to the Washington Commanders. I think they're going to be in the they'll get in category. I think they're going to be right here, because here's the thing. Obviously, as long as they have Jaden Daniels, they're going to be, a surefire playoff contender. They're going to be the biggest threat to the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC East. And their ceiling is the conference championship, because they got there before. And I think if they even have a better season this year, I don't think a Super Bowl is out of the discussion or out of the realm of possibility. But like I said earlier, I'm scared that it's going to be like a Green Bay Packers season or a Houston Texans season, where they win enough games to make it to the playoffs, but they don't really show that excitement or that fire or that passion that, we all thought they would have, entering the year. So I don't want to drop off on either side of the ball, but defensively, they still have a lot of questions to answer. And as for Jaden Daniels, as great as he is, if you don't have Terry McLaurin, then this offense is, going to take a little bit of a drop off, especially since you don't really know what you have when it comes to your offensive line, because it is not a sturdy unit by any means necessary. But I could say the same thing for the Dallas Cowboys, because they are entering an even worse predicament than the Washington Commanders are in right now when it comes to Terry McLaurin. And the reason why, Micah Parsons is not only holding out, but he's also requested a trade. It looks like that the relationship between him and Jerry Jones is incredibly severed. That is beyond repair. But then again, this is Jerry Jones when it comes to contract negotiations. They always drag this out for as long as possible. Then at the very last minute, a deal gets done, and everybody's happy. They sing Kumbaya, and they have a pretty good to okay regular season, only for them to disappoint when it comes to December and January and just get either eliminated in the playoffs or not even make it entirely. So that's just the constant cycle of the Dallas Cowboys. And it's going to happen with somebody else in the near future. Honestly, I don't know who it is at this point, but this is just the Dallas Cowboys way. It is a soap opera 365 days a year. But instead of winning and actually trying to compete for championships, they just want to get in the ratings. They still want to prove that they're the most valuable franchise in the league, and they just want to get asses in seats. Entering this year, they got Brian Schottenheimer as their new head coach, somebody that did not call plays for them in the 2 years that he's been the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys since Kellen Moore left. And when you look at his track record everywhere else, so good. I'm going to look up Brian Schottenheimer right now and just show you what I'm talking about. So before that, he was the Jaguars passing game coordinator in 2021. That was the year that Urban Meyer took over as head coach, and when Trevor Lawrence had one of the worst rookie seasons from a quarterback since, who knows since how long? Probably since Jameis Winston, maybe even earlier than that. They went 3-14. The offense was one of the worst in the league. They were one of the worst teams in turnover differential, and it was just an outright disaster. Seahawks, he had a little more success. I mean, that's what happens when you have Russell Wilson from 2018 to 2020, but it didn't stop Russell Wilson. He didn't stop Russell Wilson from getting absolutely mauled by a horrific offensive line. And more importantly, in 2020, it was considered to be Russell Wilson's best season because he did throw 40 touchdown passes, but 22 of those were in the first half of the year. Or actually, it was possibly even more. I'm going to say 26. And then the second half of the year, the play incredibly dropped off, and it resulted in a first-round elimination to the Los Angeles Rams because the turnovers piled up, the sacks continued, and, instead of Russ cooking, he was burning the whole kitchen down. He was also the quarterback's coach in 2016 and 2017 with the Indianapolis Colts. Two incredibly mediocre seasons, well, at least 2016, in which they fell in third place to a Houston Texans team with Brock Osweiler and a Tennessee Titans team with Marcus Mariota and Mike Mularkey as their head coach. 2017, Andrew Luck is out for the season, and Jacoby Brissett takes over, and the Colts have one of the worst offenses in the league. Georgia in 2015, offense was absolutely horrific. Same thing with the St. Louis Rams. And then with the New York Jets, you had to deal with freaking Mike Sanchez, in the final few years, in which he was probably, the Jets, they did make it to the conference championship in 2009 and 2010, but that was in spite of the quarterback play. That was because of an outstanding running game and a great defense. And you saw first and foremost against the Indianapolis Colts in 2009 and the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2010, that as long as you force Mark Sanchez to beat him by himself, then that's what it was going to take to win. So I'm going to stop right there because it's just going to be incredibly boring if I continued even longer. But the point is, Brian Schottenheimer does not have the best track record when he has full control of an offense, let alone full control of a football team. I get that this offense has talent, but last year, it pretty much showed that it had way more flaws than strengths. Dak Prescott was 3-5 before he got injured with a torn hamstring. He threw, let me look at his stats right here, 11 touchdowns, 8 picks with an 86 passer rating. And keep in mind, he wasn't the one calling plays, yet he's getting promoted to be the head coach of this football team. Mainly because Jerry Jones wants a yes man instead of somebody that's going to hold this team accountable and give them enough discipline and enough motivation and enough energy to actually compete for a championship rather than get sent home in the wild card or at the very least the second round of the playoffs. The running back room does not have a whole lot of depth. They drafted Jaden Blue in the second or third round, but at the same time, if Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders are your two starting backs, then you're just hoping that they could turn back the clock to their best seasons and put up, anywhere between 800 and 1,000 yards. But Miles Sanders got exposed as a system back with the Philadelphia Eagles when he signed a huge lucrative deal with the Carolina Panthers and then got cut after 2 seasons. And Javonte Williams hasn't been fully healthy in the last 4 seasons. Yet some Cowboys fans are saying that, hey, he might be the difference we need in our backfield. Even though Rico Dowdle, the guy that they just let walk away in free agency, had 1,000 yards last year. The receiving duo of CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens shows a lot of promise. CeeDee Lamb is obviously coming off a pretty strong season, even with, the quarterback carousel they had last year. George Pickens, though, he's definitely a guy that, has a lot of talent and has a lot of potential. But when it comes to being a team player and when it comes to being, a positive guy in the locker room, still a lot left there that needs to be desired. You got Jalen Tolbert as a good third option, Jake Ferguson as a security blanket, the offensive line. 14th in sacks allowed, 7th lowest pressure percentage. I think a lot of that just had to do with the fact that Dak was out, but it's still a solid lineup. They drafted Tyler Booker in the first round to complement the other two Tylers, Guyton and Smith. Cooper Beebe coming off a pretty strong year at center, and you still have Terrence Steele at right tackle. So the offense is not going to be completely horrible. I'm not saying they're going to look great, but I'm not saying they're going to be absolutely garbage, but I'm not saying they're going to be great either, because when it comes to the teams that they have to beat, Detroit, Philadelphia, LA Rams, Tampa Bay, whoever else, Washington, prove that they are worthy of beating these top tier teams rather than just feasting off a bunch of bottom feeders that have no business in being in an actual NFL stadium with some of the best teams in the league. So I know what they can do against, the teams they can beat or that they should beat. I want to see what they can do against the teams they have to go up against. That's the bottom line. And defensively, without Micah Parsons, see this defense getting anywhere good. They hired Matt Eberflus as their defensive coordinator, but last year with Mike Zimmer, they showed a huge drop-off. They gave up the second most points, the fifth most yards, the worst red zone defense in football, 28th in passer rating, second most yards per attempt, 27th in completion percentage, 17th in yards per game passing, 28th in rush yards per carry, 29th in rush yards per game. They did have the third most sacks. A lot of that did have to do with the fact that Micah Parsons was there, even though he did miss a few games. 4th in blitz pressure percentage, 10th in blitz percentage. So the pass rushing numbers are promising. But again, without Micah Parsons, it's going to come down to Oso Digizua, Marshawn Nealon. You got DeMarvion Overshown, most likely going to be out for an extended period of the season due to a fractured kneecap. Mozzie Smith, he's not coming off a great season last year. He's definitely his roster spot is, definitely fringy, to say the least. And when you look at the linebacking room, I just don't even know who the hell is going to step in and, really take over. Because Kenneth Murray Jr. has been a bust as a first-round pick. Jack Sanborn, he's not a first-round pick, but he has not really been an impressive linebacker. Damone Clark, he shows promise, but he's definitely undersized. And at the same time, actually, I don't even have his numbers here, but they also drafted Donovan Azurukow in a mid-round pick from Boston College, the rookie from Boston College. They re-signed Dante Fowler. They added Solomon Thomas. They added Peyton Turner and James Houston. But you're just hoping that they can, return to form. And right now, you really don't know what you're going to get from them. The same thing goes for the secondary, because Trayvon Diggs, not only coming off an injury-riddled season, but showed a little bit of a drop-off last year. 81.1 passer rating in 11 games, 2 picks, 11 passes defended. Numbers are definitely a little bit better than last year, but there was also the report that, he didn't show up to the mandatory treatment or whatever it was that, Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones fined him for. And, they said that, listen, these are mandatory compliances, and if you're not going to show up, that's a problem. I think that's what the story was. Derod Bland, he's coming off a year where he allowed 4 touchdowns and a near 118 passer rating allowed. Kalen Carson, 133 passer rating allowed. Donovan Wilson, great safety, but, puts up a lot of tackles that could really shore up the run game and is an outstanding blitzer. But when it comes to pass coverage, 130.5 passer rating allowed. Malik Hooker, same deal, 104 rate passer rating allowed, although you had 81 tackles. So this is a defense that you got to figure out what you're going to do with Micah Parsons fast, because he is the driving force of that group. He is the heartbeat of that locker room. He's the best player on that football team. And without him, I'm going to expect that team is going to fall off a cliff. Just look at what happened when Emmitt Smith was holding out for a new deal in 1993. It carried over into the first 2 games of the regular season. They were 0-2. Things were at a crossroads. And then finally, Jerry Jones caved in and said, we're going to make you the highest paid running back in football. And they ended up winning a Super Bowl by going 14-2 the rest of the regular season. So as a result, I'm going to put the Cowboys in the just okay category, but I'm going to say this. If they trade Micah Parsons or if they can't get him back in time for the regular season, whatever the case may be, then they're going to be in the not good category, and it's going to get ugly really, really, really fast. So speaking of things looking pretty ugly, let's talk about the New York Giants. So they addressed the quarterback position after, the outright destruction that they faced last year, with Daniel Jones getting benched and then getting cut. Drew Lock, obviously being Drew Lock. Tommy DeVito, not cooking the way we all thought he could. And is there another quarterback that I'm forgetting? No, I think that was it. I think it was just those three. Entering this season, it's going to look a lot different. They signed Russell Wilson to a 2-year deal. They added Jameis Winston as the backup. But in the first round of the draft, they traded up to select Jaxson Dart out of Ole Miss. So you know that he's going to be the future moving forward. But if you're Joe Schoen, the general manager, and Brian Daboll, the head coach, you are on the hottest of seats. And it all stems back to when they lowballed Saquon Barkley. They gave Daniel Jones all the money. And instead of trying to find a way to bring Saquon Barkley back home or to keep him from going anywhere else, they let him walk away in free agency. They let him go to a division rival, their most hated division rival in the Philadelphia Eagles. He puts up 2,000 yards, wins the Super Bowl, the biggest reason why that offense was allowed to take off, and he was the missing piece as to what the Eagles needed to win a championship that season. I get that Tyrone Tracy had an outstanding rookie season, had a promising rookie year, but he's not Saquon. Neither is rookie Cam Scatterbo, and neither is Devin Singletary, who is really more of a scheme fit for Brian Daboll than anything, to be quite honest. And he's not even that great of a running back. So this is definitely the year where they cannot afford to have a horrible start, or else both Shane and Daboll, they're going to get fired in the middle of the year, and John Mara, the owner, is going to have no hesitation in doing so. When you look at this offense, you know it has an outstanding focal point of the passing attack and Malik Neighbors. You got your best blindside blocker, your best offensive lineman, and Andrew Thomas coming back after suffering a foot injury earlier in the year. You got quality depth pieces like Wan'Dale Robinson. You got Darius Slayton. You're hoping for a breakout year from Theo Johnson. You need to see what you have in Jalen Hyatt. So it's not like on paper, it's not a horrific offense. You just need A, the right quarterback throwing you the football. And B, you need to make sure that this offensive line finally turns the corner. Now, I understand before Andrew Thomas got hurt, they weren't completely horrible. But once he went down, everybody else turned back into the pylons that, we all kind of expected before the season started. They definitely did their best by, keeping John Runyon and Jermaine Illuminor and Greg Van Roden and John Michael Schmitz. But Evan Neal, their 4th overall pick, who knows if he even makes it on the roster during training camp. My guess is they probably will keep him because, they want to see what he could do in a full season at starting right guard or backup or as a rotational piece, whatever the case may be. I honestly don't really know what the Giants' plans are when it comes to this O-line. I know this is what the ESPN depth chart says, but things could definitely, change from time to time. But this is, like I said, this is a hugely critical season for that offense. And it's also a very important season for this defense because they definitely did their best to rebeef the D-line, but more importantly, fix the secondary. They signed Javon Holland. They signed Paulson Adebo in free agency. Deonte Banks coming off a pretty abysmal season last year as he could not live up to his first-round pedigree. Tyler Newman and Drew Phillips, they're entering their second seasons, but you still need to see a lot more from them to, for them to prove that, they're worthy of keeping for the foreseeable future. And let me look at their numbers right here. If you look at the Giants' passing defense, they allowed the 3rd highest passer rating. They were 29th in yards per attempt. They gave up the 2nd highest completion percentage. And I'm going to bring up the numbers right here. Deonte Banks, 123.4 passer rating, 6 touchdowns allowed. Paulson Adebo last year with the New Orleans Saints, 68.8 passer rating in just 7 games with a few interceptions. So you already can see that as a huge upgrade. Andrew Phillips only had 6 starts and only played 14 games, but he's coming off a pretty promising year, 95.1 passer rating with an interception. Cordell Flott, who's, probably their most underrated piece on the defense, an 86.9 passer rating allowed in just 10 starts after giving up an 84 rating in 2023. So they are hoping that he can really break out in his 3rd season in the league. They lost Jason Pinnock, but like I said, they added Javon Holland and Tyler Nubin. So you know that Shane Bowen is going to want to make sure that this passing defense really improves. But that also was, the biggest flaw when he was Mike Vrabel's defensive coordinator in Tennessee. But we all know that the main strength on this defense is going to be their defensive line because they drafted Abdul Carter with the 3rd overall pick to pair up with Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau and Dexter Lawrence. They brought in Roy Robertson Harris, not only to, provide a ton of pressure, but to shore up the run defense. You kept Raheem Nunez-Roches to, be that quality rotational piece as well. But, they were eighth in sacks, 6th in blitz percentage, 15th in pressure percentage. And when you look at the run defense, that was one area that I was really expecting to, really improve and, to make sure that it turned the corner. But if I look at my notes right here, did I not write it down? Oh boy. But the point is, you got Bobby Okereke and Micah Parsons, shoring up the second level. And, I think with the addition of Abdul Carter, you're bringing a lot more size. You're bringing a lot more, you're bringing more length. And more importantly, you're bringing in, an instant game changer that, can rise up to the level that Micah Parsons did for the Dallas Cowboys. But having said all of that, let me just pull up the Giants schedule here because I know that strength of schedule can be overrated when you're entering a new season, but I'm just going to let me just pull it up right here. Here we go. Look at their first 4 games of the season. At Washington, at Dallas, versus Kansas City, versus the Chargers. That is a pretty tough stretch to start the season. You got to play the Eagles twice in 3 weeks with the Denver Broncos in between, who have one of the best defenses in football. After that, you've got the 49ers, the Bears, the Packers, the Lions, the Patriots. You got the Commanders out of the bye. Then you got the Vikings, and then you close out with the Cowboys. Like, that is a very, very brutal schedule, even if, your quarterback issues get resolved, and even if Shane and Daboll don't get fired in the middle of the season. So to be quite honest, I might put the Giants in the number 1 pick contention, not necessarily because of the roster, but just because of the fact that their schedule is insanely brutal. They already play in one of the toughest divisions in the league. They play in an even tougher conference. And when you look at the teams that they have to go up against in the AFC, like the Chiefs and the Chargers and the Broncos, even the Raiders, that is not a sign that shows that, okay, this is going to be a fully healthy season and that, we're really going to turn things around and, we're going to really surge as a playoff team. You need to make sure that every single thing goes right for them to even have a chance. So I'm very interested to see, what Brian Daboll could do. And more importantly, if things don't go out the way, they hope, then Daboll and Shane can get the heck out. So that wraps it up. The division previews are finally over. We can finally enter week 1. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe for additional content. I'm sorry I was rambling, for a long time, but this is what happens when you have terrible handwriting and you write all of your notes on this beautiful thing right here. So we'll see you back around sometime to preview week 1, and hope you have a great rest of your week, everybody. So this is the NFC East preview. This is Collin O'Callahan.